So it's no secret that all of us are trying to be somewhat self-sufficient. But one thing we can't really control is the fuel we put in our car. Diesel, some. Gasoline, not so much. Today we're going to be talking about gasoline and what E10, E15, E85, wreck gas, all that dumb shit, what that means to you. Stay tuned.
I need the CEO of Winchester to be a pallbearer at my funeral so they let me down the last time.
Okay, so this was supposed to be a fairly short video. I think it's going to end up being a little bit longer because I had to do all these calculations that you see here. So we need to talk about gasoline. When our parents were children, they used tetraethyl lead or lead
Watch your flags. Move as
in
one.
gasoline.
Only a single path up this mountain, and it's not likely to be easy.
Well, that shit was pretty toxic. Turn the volume down on this. But tetraethyl lead was pretty toxic. I don't know the exact numbers, but I'd say it probably knocks several million IQ points off of the human population globally. Not good shit. Probably about as much as sodium fluoride has, and ethyl mercury. But that's beside the point. This message is not brought to you by Pfizer. So, when my generation was born, a lot of leaded gas was faded out. And it was faded out to a company. The next thing they used for octane booster was a compound called MBT or MTBE, a bunch of aromatic hydrocarbons that up the octane rating. They also used BTEX, that was a xylitol based chemical. Now, the toxicity of those is still pretty toxic, probably a little bit more toxic than that blue hair dye you used. And then what we're using now is ethanol. You see, E10, no more than 10% ethanol. The EPA is now allowing 15% ethanol to be put in your fuel because they've raised the vapor barrier threshold. So, what does that mean? Well, ethanol is probably the least toxic octane booster we've ever used, but it does come with its own caveats. To put that in perspective, tetraethyl lead. Hang on, I'm about to die. Something's happening. Let's kill those guys real quick. No, maybe not. Forgot I'm on Torment 8. Ooh, layer key. Very nice. ADHD kicked in, sorry. So if you want to put things in layman's terms, tetraethyl lead made you retarded. MTBE made you grow lumps, not the lovely lady kind. The xylitol also gave you some of the not so lovely lady lumps. And ethanol, the most that happens if you consume ethanol is you make very, very, very fucking bad decisions. Sometimes you wake up with a 30-year-old pediatrics nurse with no condom in sight. Sometimes you try to fight the Russian Navy and lose. It just depends. So overall, ethanol is probably the least toxic of all the octane boosters we've ever used. Well, let's talk about environmental friendliness. You gotta do the fucking crazy liberal eyes. Lead, pretty fucking high. Had a huge environmental impact, caused all kinds of problems. There's still lead. Like, lead levels are still high because of it. MTBE, yeah, released a lot of aromatic compounds in the atmosphere. Not great. Same thing with the xylitol. Now, here's where it gets weird. Ethanol, because it's grown from corn and it's super environmentally friendly and it sequesters carbon. Well, the government has labeled it as, environmentally friendly. Well, it's fucking not. I'm sorry. There's nothing environmentally friendly about growing corn at all, ever. So let's talk about that. So the EPA has mandated since 2005 that ethanol be put in fuels as a renewable biofuel. It's healthy. The corn grows and it sequesters the carbon, and then we use that carbon that we've sequestered to reburn it. We're it's net carbon and neutrality and lower carbon footprint and all that gay ass bullshit. Well, here's the facts. There's nothing environmentally friendly about growing corn. So, fuel, right? You have to explore and drill, and then you have to pipe it over to a refinery where more energy is used to basically heat it up to distill certain compounds out of it. And then it's piped to a mixing station where it gets blended with detergents and whatnot. And then it's trucked over to your local gas station for you to put in your car. Well, let's talk about corn. You don't just throw fucking corn seeds out and they magically appear and grow this wonderful EPA great friendly fuel. The EPA says it's environmentally friendly. You know, the EPA also said black mercury filters are considered pesticide, and now you can't fucking buy them. So honestly, fuck the EPA. And I'd honestly like to do things to those people that I can't say on YouTube. But that's beside the point. The point is that okay, yeah, you sprinkle the little corn seeds out, but here's the process of all that. Corn eats up a fuck ton of nitrogen in your soil. All the corn that's planted right now is genetically modified organisms. Well, what does that mean? A lot of people get mad about GMOs, but they don't really know why they're mad about GMOs. What they've done is they've used E. coli to genetically splice a certain gene from the petunia plant onto the corn. Well, why would they do that? It seems pretty harmless, right? Well, the reason they did that is so they can spray a metric fuck ton of glyphosate on the fields to kill all the weeds in between the corn. So now the corn is like actually glyphosate dependent. They've genetically modified it to where you have to use glyphosate. Like you have to use glyphosate on corn. What is glyphosate? Glyphosate is Roundup. How does Roundup kill fucking plants and weeds? Well, it's an endocrine system inhibitor. It interferes with the endocrine system, allowing basically it nutrient starves the plant to death because the endocrine system can no longer distribute nutrients throughout the plant. You know what else has you know what else has an endocrine system? Shit, I got an endocrine system. Guarantee you got an endocrine system. You think it might fucking disrupt it? Well, over $2 billion worth of lawsuits says it fucking does. So there you go. Like it's so bad that the Monsanto had the head of the EPA on their fucking payroll, and we're having this motherfucker come up with excuses to why Roundup was good. Just like he came up with an excuse that fucking black mercury filters are a goddamn pesticide when they're not. So something to keep in mind. It's a big fucking what was that thing George Carlin said? It's a big club and you ain't in it. Yeah, that doesn't just apply to corporations. That applies to government too. So all you fucking pot lickers who thinks the government's on your fucking side. Petroleum. Look up phosphate ponds and fucking potassium ponds and all that fun happy horse shit that comes as a byproduct of fertilizers. And then when they spray all the fertilizer on the fucking farm fields, all that shit runs off into your water supply along with the glyphosate and kills all the fucking ocean life at the Gulf of Mexico. Look that shit up. Huge dead spot right there where the Mississippi River drains off into the Gulf. Yeah, no fish live there because all the nitrogen. The nitrogen creates fucking algae. The algae fucking eats up all the oxygen and fucking destroys the ecosystem. So if you think fucking putting ethanol in your fuel is miraculously going to save the environment, you probably fucking consume some tetraethyl lead in your life because you're fucking retarded. Kill, kill all these bitches. So next thing, let's talk about energy density. Using tetraethyl lead and all these other ones didn't really rob the gasoline of energy density. The main reason was because you didn't have to put a whole lot of it in to boost the octane. So nowadays we've got our octane ratings. So, you know, your base gas for your E0 was 87 to 93 back in the day. E10 is 87 octane, but the base gas, the petroleum part, is actually only 83 octane. You need to fucking remember that. Because there's a kid online showing people how to mix water in the gasoline and remove the ethanol, and you can totally do that. Gasoline is hydrophobic. Ethanol is hydrophilic to the point where it's hydroscopic. It's important to note. So yes, water can pull the ethanol out of gasoline. The downside is if you do this to 93 octane, you end up with 90 to 91 octane base gas because they're using the ethanol as an octane booster. If you use 87 octane, you do this 87 octane, you're gonna end up with 83 octane. You know what happens if you put 83 octane in your engine? Yeah, knock, ting, 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 boom. Your fuel detonates and it fucks your motor up. If you don't know what knock and detonation and all that shit is, you need to look at my show description. There's going to be a shit ton of information, including some tags to some videos from Lake Speed Jr. from the Motor Oil Geek. Turns out he's a fuel geek too, and he knows a lot about it. And I'll post some information down there about some ethanol. Because I'd love if you finished this video to the end and you liked and subscribed. That would tickle me shitless. But my ultimate goal here is for you to learn what you're putting into your tank and completely understand it. And there's other people that can help you understand it better than I can too. So after you watch this video, please go down to my description and watch all the other subsequent videos and give those people likes and subscribe to their channels too because they're extremely informative. It's going to include High Performance Academy, who taught me how to fucking tune, and it's going to include the Motor Oil Geek, who I learned a lot about motor oil from because I almost put Pro Lube in my car, which would have been a dumb fucking choice, and he'll show you why. Lilith, is this your father's doing? Lilith? Uh-oh. Something might have happened to Lilith. Mephisto might have got her. Who knows? Just like Mephisto put ethanol in her fucking gas. If I had to think of a fictional place that Washington, D.C. most closely reminds me of, it'd be fucking Mordor. Oh, my path ends here. Okay. So we're going to keep talking about this. So you need to keep the base gas in consideration because you can, if you take 93 octane, and I've calculated it right here. Right now, it's a Thornton's 93 octane, and I'm going to use this whole piece of paper later on to explain energy loss in the fuel. But if you take the E10 93, not 92 or 93, whatever the fuck it was, and you use water to pull the ethanol out of it, and you end up with basically what's 90 or 91 octane rec gas. It was $5.45 a gallon for the fuel that you buy out of the pump. By the time you've converted it over, it's going to be $6.05 per gallon. So you need to understand: is it worth it to do that over buying the rec gas? I couldn't find rec gas anywhere to fucking buy. So there's that. So let's keep talking. I've got a whole list of shit. I was going to do a whole itemized show notes. We're just going to talk about my calculations here. Another thing you need to understand is that, yeah, it lowers the base gas octane rating. So ethanol does provide octane. E100 has a RON of like 110, but the motor octane rating is closer to like 88, 89. So it just depends. Like they're saying the calculated octane rating is higher than the actual octane rating. So you need to keep that in mind. And your AKI number, the number on your pump, is your R divided by M. Something to keep in mind. So another thing you need to talk about is the air fuel ratio. When you add ethanol to fuel, the air fuel ratio of pure ethanol is 9.0 to 1. That means it takes 9 parts of air per 1 part of fuel. And that's because, and I'm not talking just oxygen, I'm talking air, which has about 20% oxygen content, give or take. And that's because ethanol is C2H6O. So you've got your carbon, you've got hydrogen, 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 another carbon, hydrogen, hydrogen, single covalent bonded oxygen, hydrogen, covalently bonded off the oxygen. That's something to keep in mind. So since it does contain oxygen, there's less energy density, and it also has a lower air fuel ratio because there's oxygen in the fuel. This Seems like it's a good thing. We're about to find out why it's not. So that means, by the way, so pure gasoline has an air fuel ratio of 14.7 to 1. E10 has an air fuel ratio of 14 to 1. E15 has an air fuel ratio of 13.8 to 1. E85 has an air fuel ratio of 9.8 to 1. These numbers matter. Like, if you put E85 in an open loop ECU or carbureted engine, you're going to be running dangerously fucking lean. Of Stoic. And Stoic is pretty fucking lean. Stoic being your stoichiometric air fuel ratio, the air fuel ratio which you get a balanced equation, a balanced stoichiometric equation, which would be your 14.7 to 1, or 1.0 lambda. Lambda is an easier number to understand because 1.0 lambda can be 14.7 to 1 for gasoline. 1.0 lambda is also 9.0 to 1 for E100 ethanol. So lambda 1 is stoichiometric no matter what you do. Something to learn. So let's go talk tutorial. It was the only way I knew. Uh-oh. I hope I'm not spoiling this game for y'all. Tyrael comes back. Woo! Tyrael died. Oh no. Oh shit, fireballs. So that's why you're not supposed to run E10 and E15 in small engines. One, it wreaks havoc on your carburetor. And two, it's going to change your air fuel ratio. And I'll run those numbers here in a little bit. So the vapor barrier. Now this is where shit gets weird. So we're going to talk about the vaporization of ethanol. Ethanol is not all bad. Ethanol actually has a lot of good qualities. One being the latent heat. So the latent heat of gas is 420 kilojoules per kilogram. Sorry, I'm using commie numbers. It's easier to use commie numbers when it comes to chemistry. Ethanol is 845 kilojoules per kilogram. What that means is ethanol takes more heat out of the atmosphere to vaporize than gasoline does. This means that your motor will run cooler. Not only does ethanol provide octane boost, like turbo guys are big fans of E85 right now because it's cheap, high octane fuel, but is it really? We will do the calculation later on it. But that you're going to get that evaporative cooling more present with ethanol. Now, ethanol also has a lower heat of combustion. Gasoline is 42.4 megajoules per kilogram, and ethanol is 26.8 megajoules per kilogram. It means, pardon me, it means ethanol burns cooler. Once again, that's good for knock. Having things cool is good for knock because when things are cool, you don't hit that high temperature area where your fuel spontaneously combusts or detonates. And that's a good thing. And then you end up running into the Reed vapor pressure. Now, this is a big one. This is what the EPA has recently upped. So, gasoline has a Reed vapor pressure of around 7 to 9 psi. That's the volatility of the fuel, how easily it is to evaporate. So, you want a high vapor pressure in the winter because it's cold and you need vapor to start fuel. So, in the winter, they add to the Reed vapor pressure by adding more butane to the fuel. And in the summer, they back off from the butane and lower the Reed vapor pressure so all your fuel doesn't evaporate off into your evaporative emissions. Lowers evaporative emissions, actually saves you on gas. So now here's where things get weird. I said gasoline has 7 to 9 psi. E100 has a Reed vapor pressure of 2 psi. E85, 2.5 to 4.5. But E10 has a Reed vapor pressure of 9 to 10 psi. And E15 is something above 9 at all times. I couldn't really get the solid information off the EPA or the Department of Energy's website, and who knows if that's even accurate because the government lies. But from my calculations, they've actually done some decent calculations on this. So I'm going to go ahead and say I partially trust them on this. So this is one of those weird situations where it's not linear. Adding more ethanol does not lower the Reed vapor pressure. It actually increases it to an extent, and then it goes back down. It's logarithmic. something to keep in mind. So you are going to have more vapor in the summer with ethanol-based fuels, and that's not necessarily a horrible thing in the winter. You do want a higher vapor pressure in the winter. It makes your car start easier. So that's cool. Now let's talk about energy. Gasoline, base gasoline, straight out the refinery, has an energy density of 114,000 BTUs per gallon. Pretty good. Straight ethanol, now this is linear. Ethanol has an energy density of 76,330 BTUs per gallon. Back to the standard units. That's roughly 33% less energy than gasoline, off the top of my head. But where that comes into play, when you mix E10, that's 10% ethanol, you end up with a energy density of, now this is where the government, the DOE's numbers and my numbers differ. The government's numbers are 112,000 BTUs per gallon for E10 and 111,000 BTUs per gallon for E15 or your Super 88. And E85 is about 81,000 BTUs per gallon. Now, that's it. And I did all the 85 calculations at 83 octane. Or not 83 octane, at 83% ethanol. That's the highest rate of ethanol they can have in E85. And that's typically the summer mix, what we would see now. Because once again, you got to have actual gasoline to start your car in the winter. Because the read vapor pressure of E85 is 2.5 to 4.5 psi, and that's off the DOE website. I'll also post some links to congress.gov to explain what's going on and the Department of Energy website where I found a lot of this information. So why does that matter, the BTUs per gallon? Well, I calculated the E10 only has 110,233 BTUs a gallon. That's a pretty big difference. You're talking they're a couple percent off there. And then your E15 would have 108,349.5 BTUs per gallon. Well, that's a whole lot of BTUs less than 114,000. And that matters. And I'll show you why it matters. So there's a whole calculation you can do. Just because E10 and E15 are cheaper doesn't mean they're going to be as efficient. E85 is the biggest culprit of this. I did the math on it. So on my notes, I've also posted the composition of the fuels. I couldn't find anything that says if E10 or E15 actually burn hotter. Ethanol is supposed to burn cooler, but in my experience, tuning a KLX 300 and observing engine coolant temperatures, E10 and E15 burn hotter and raise your engine coolant temperatures higher than standard gasoline does. So I'm not sure if that's a logarithmic thing. Maybe I'm all fucked up. Who knows? But I couldn't find any information on whether it actually causes higher combustion temperatures being mixed like that as compared to regular gasoline. And if you can find that information, I'd appreciate it if you post it down here in a comment. Make my life a little bit easier. Another quirk about ethanol is you do have to advance your ignition timing if you're running any kind of ethanol blends. E10, it could be a couple degrees up to E85. You might need to advance your ignition timing, 5 to 25 fucking degrees to get it to, in order to hit MBT. And that's because the initial burn of the ethanol is faster, but it ignites slower, significantly slower. And that's something you need to keep in mind. So if you are tuning on that, in order to hit MBT, you might have to. Now, ethanol does allow you to advance your ignition timing more, but you might actually be required to advance it more just to hit MBT. And that's your maximum brake torque. That's the point at which your motor provides the most amount of torque at about 12 to 18 degrees after top dead center. So you're actually exerting the most mechanical force on the piston most efficiently to produce the most work. And you can learn all about that at the High Performance Academy. I'd go check that out. And send these motherfuckers. Oh, they actually took some fucking health out of me that time. Just a little bit. I love this build. They nerfed my paladin and I finally got him back up to where he needs to be. Running Sundered Knight, an untraditional Orden. Ooh, a unique charm. Very nice. An ancestral unique charm. Nice. That does the same thing my gloves do. My sets are better though. Okay, so let's talk about the math. So, based on these energy density numbers that I told you, it takes roughly 2% more E10 to do the same amount of work as E0. It takes about 3% more E15 to do the same amount of work as E0. That was based on the government numbers too, so it's actually more. Turns out it's the actual numbers are about 3.5 for E10, 5.2% for E15. It takes 37.8% more work. Well, actually, those are the final numbers. But so the energy, based on the energy density E85, it takes about 41% more E85 to do the same amount of work as E0. And E100 takes about 50% more to do the same amount of work as E0. That means you need more fuel to put the same amount of horsepower out to get your car to go the same speed as you would with E0. You need more fuel to do that. Now, that is not a linear statement, and we're going to explain why, because you have to take the stoichiometric air fuel ratio into consideration. When you take the AFR into consideration, most newer cars run on a closed loop system using a narrowband O2 sensor, and they are designed to idle and cruise at stoic and then run about 13.2 to 1 at full throttle. And the reason you run rich of stoic is because the evaporative cooling of the fuel prevents knock and keeps your exhaust gas temperatures lower at wide open throttle. So your 14.71 is stoic. Most vehicles run stoic. They don't run stoic because it's the best fuel economy. You can actually get better economy at 1.03 to 1.05 lambda, about 15 to 1 air fuel ratio on gasoline. So slightly leaner stoic you can run to get better fuel economy. They run stoic for emissions. At stoic, you get the lowest emissions. And you also happen to get some pretty stinking good fuel economy out of stoic. Now, where this gets weird is you don't want to run significantly lean of stoic, so you have a narrowband O2 sensor that's designed to keep you at stoic. Your fuel maps are designed to give you base mapping, and then they rely on the O2 sensor to correct the stoic. That's how closed loop works. That's important. That's how closed loop works. Most cars run closed loop fuel mapping on their ECUs. They run a dejetronic or speed density map based on your map pressure or your math, manifold airflow, or mass airflow, sorry, based on your mass airflow, your manifold absolute pressure. They run a map based off of it for your fuel, and they make corrections based on your O2 sensor inputs to keep you at stoic during certain map conditions, and to run you rich of stoic under different map conditions like wide open throttle or high load. So if you're running at stoic on gasoline, that's 14.7 to 1. Well, if you're running stoic on E10, guess what? That's 14 to 1. So you have to run 5% more fuel to achieve stoic, or else you run dangerously lean. You run vehicles dangerously lean, they get stupid fucking hot, and they will cause detonation. It's not good for, and you lose a shit ton of power. Once you get past 1.05 lambda, your power just fucking tanks, and then you have to hit the gas harder to create more power, which is counterintuitive to fuel economy, because then you have to add more fuel to maintain your stoichiometric air fuel ratio to burn the existing oxygen in the cylinder. So for E10, you have to burn about 5% more fuel to do that. For E15, you got to burn about 7% more. For E85, you have to burn about 50% more. And for E100, you have to burn about 63% more. Now, that's not the overall amount of fuel that you're going to consume. This is one of those numbers the EPA got correct. The EPA states that E10 will have typically about 3% less fuel economy than E0. Well, how do you get 3% if you have to bump 5% for Stoic? And you're already at 3.5% less energy, right? Or 3.3. How that works is, so you take the Stoic number 1.05 divided by the energy density, which would be 0.97, or you multiply it by 0.97. 1.05 times 0.97, you should get something like 1.035. Well, that means that if you're running 5% increased fuel at a fuel density that is 3% less dense, in order to achieve Stoic, you're going to be putting out roughly 103.5% horsepower, or 103.5% horsepower versus the standard 100 that you would need. So you're actually putting out more horsepower. So what happens is you end up backing off the fuel and air both to get to the fuel ratio, or to get to the power ratio that you need to do the amount of work. Say you're trying to travel at 55 miles an hour, right? Well, if you end up going Stoic versus regular gasoline, you would end up putting out more power than you need. So then you would back off on the air to get to 100%. This math that I've did equals E10 at about 3.5% more fuel consumption over E0. You get E15 with 5.2% more fuel consumption over E0. And E85 ends up being 37.8% more fuel consumption over E0. And that's where these numbers really, really matter. Oh, we got a beast in the deep. Die, bitch. He's not even really hurting me. And he's dead. I think I can go up a torment level on this. Ooh, set charms. Got some royal stuff. Yeah. Let me pick up my shit. Not in any hurry. So let me show you a clip real quick of fuel at near my house. Here it is. Okay, so we're at the Thorntons by my house. We've got E85, 430 a gallon. We got E85, 430 a gallon. Unleaded 88, which is E15, 435. E10, 87, 445. 89, 505. And 92, all these are E10 at 545 a gallon. 10% ethanol, 90% unleaded gasoline. May contain up to 15 or 51 to 83% ethanol. So as you can see, our E1087 octane is $4.45 a gallon. The Super 88 E15 is $4.35 a gallon. Your E1093 is $5.45 a gallon. That's significant for another reason. We're not going to do this calculation yet. And your E85 is $4.30 a gallon. It's the cheapest one, but it's only a nickel cheaper than your Super 88. And it's only fucking 15 cents cheaper per gallon than your 87 octane. But if you go back, I said it takes 37.8% more fuel to do the same amount of work as your E0. Well, if you take away the efficiency of the E0 and baseline E10, that number becomes 34.3%. So E15, right? It's roughly 2% less efficient than E10, 1.7%. Well, at 1.7% less efficient, at $4.35 a gallon, it's going to cost you $4.42 in fuel to do the same amount of work as the E10 87 octane. So you're saving maybe 3 cents per gallon, but you're having to fill up a lot more. And I say a lot more. You have to fill up a little bit more. A lot more is an exaggeration. I don't like to exaggerate like that. So where this number comes into consideration is, yeah, with E15 you're saving a touch of money, but your E85 is $4.30 a gallon. If you multiply that by 1.343, which is the reduced energy density that you're going to have, because you need 34.3% more fuel to do the same amount of work, your E85 comes out to $5.77 to do the same amount of work as the gallon of E10 at $4.45 a gallon. It's not saving you money. It's costing you money. It's costing you, at these particular prices near my house, it's costing you a fuck ton more money to run E85 than it would if you just fucking ran E10. Something to consideration. And that's something for the fucking turbo guys to consider. E10 93 octane is $5.45 an ounce, has higher energy density, and 93 octane, generally speaking, has enough knock rating to where you're not going to knock with a turbocharged engine, and you should be able to get somewhat close to MBT. You could probably get more horsepower out of E85 because it does have that higher octane rating, and you can advance the ignition timing close to MBT. But what you're going to run into is you're going to burn a shit ton more fuel doing it. So at $5.77 a gallon, I don't know what the current price of 100 octane aviation fuel is, but you might be better off fucking putting aviation fuel in your damn car, as long as it's not the low lead shit, because the low lead shit will fuck your O2 sensor up. It's $5.77 a gallon. That's insane. Just you'd be better off running the 93. Taking a little bit of the horsepower hit. I don't, unless you're racing or whatever. You have to also consider that you're increasing the injector duty cycle by 35%. That's a lot. So if you're running, 65% injector duty cycle on regular gasoline to achieve the horsepower that you're at, and you try to do the same thing with E85, you might get up around 100% duty cycle, and then you have to compensate for the fucking dead time of the injector, and you might actually have to run bigger injectors to produce the same amount of horsepower with the 85. Something you need to consider. It's not healthy to run your injectors that hard. It's not healthy on your injectors, not healthy on your fuel pump. And that's another thing you have to consider is your fuel pump going to keep up with that? I mean, I don't know how much race gas is now. Used to be able to buy the shit at Sunoco, but you might be better off running race gas. It'd probably be a hell of a lot better for your engine. That's another thing people don't take into consideration with ethanol. Ethanol corrodes the fuck out of anything it touches that's not copper. Your steel gas tank, if you got an older vehicle, corroded. Your aluminum carburetor, you got your small engines, corroded. Your brass jets you got in your small engines, corroded. Which is why you see some people mixing water with their gasoline to pull the ethanol out. When you do that, with 93 octane, you end up with 91 octane. You're taking some hits on the octane, but you do end up with pure gasoline. Most of your small engines will run on it. However, at $5.45 a gallon for 93 octane, that's the Thorntons I showed you, it's going to cost you $6.05 per gallon to make it into 91 octane non-ethanol gas. I don't know if rec gas at the pumps is cheaper, like I said, because I could not find it. Ooh, spicy. Let's use an ultimate on that. Oh, look at that guy. So that's another consideration. Is it worth it to corrode the shit out of all your stuff? And ethanol fuel's not good on your injectors. Your injectors are typically some bimetallic substance. A lot of times, injectors I pull out of my older vehicles, like my old S10 that or not S10, my old Ranger that had a 4 liter Mazda in it, the B4000. The injector tips were brass. It will corrode those. So you take the corrosion into consideration with this fuel. Let me check my notes here while they're talking. Oh, that brings me back to my carb small engines. And I've got to do a little math on this. Well, yeah, something's wrong. So assume your Briggs and Stratton on your power washers set to run at, they run at like 25, 2600 RPM, and they run, assuming about a 13.2 to 1, point 0.9 lambda air fuel ratio. Just assume 13.2 to 1. Well, if you run that off regular gas, and I'm sure the newer ones are designed for E10, so they're probably running 13.2 to 1 on E10. But if you run rec gas on an older small engine, 13.2 to 1. Well, we've said it takes 5% more fuel to maintain that. So take 13.2 times 1.05. This is your homework. I did not calculate this yet. I forgot. And I'm filming on my phone, so maybe I'll do it on the computer. Let's do this together on the computer. I don't think it's going to kick me off my game yet. So let's take 13.2 times 1.05. Nope, that's not it. 1.1.05. That motor that's designed to run a 13.2 to 1 is now running a 13.86 to 1. So you are generating more heat. You're getting less evaporative cooling on E10, but that's still not bad, right? You can still run E10. Not a big deal. Well, what about 13.2? Go back to my notes here on air fuel ratio. You need 7% more fuel with E15. Yeah, now you're running 14.12 to 1. Now you're starting to get that motor a little bit hot. Now, depending on the compression ratio, most of them run like an 11 to 1 compression ratio. You're getting close to stoic, and you don't want to run stoic on a engine that's air cooled, that's sitting there constantly running at 2600 RPM under load. Don't do that. Yeah, it's a little high. Now, what happens if you run at E20? I don't know. I didn't calculate for E20, but E85, yeah, your shit's fucking done. Let's find out. Delete. Delete. Why are you doing this to me? Delete. You piece of shit. Where's the CE button? There we go. So take our 13.2. What do we say for E85? 50% more? You're running E85, you're running at a 19.8 to 1 air fuel ratio. You fucked. You done. So that's why you don't run E15 in these things. That it'll royally rat fuck your carburetor, and the carburetor diaphragm corrodes the shit out of this shit and erodes away the diaphragm, and the diaphragm won't work no more. So, guys, that's all I got about fuel. I think I've covered everything. Let me check my notes. I talked about half an advanced ignition timing, how it's less efficient to run these other ethanol blended fuels. You know, they're putting ethanol in fuel because they think it's environmentally friendly, even though it's not. But really, it's because they're trying to increase the gasoline supply to lower fuel costs. Right now, gasoline costs $2.81 a gallon to produce the base gas. That's your 83 octane base gas. And then it costs $2 a gallon to produce the ethanol. You know what the best way to keep fuel prices low is? In the Fed, stop printing money. And guess what? Your fuel's not $5 a gallon. When you have a deflationary currency or a stable currency like gold or Bitcoin, you know, you can actually save money and you don't lose money by saving money through inflation. And then your gas don't end up being $5 a gallon. And fucking steaks don't end up being $18 a pound. Just thought, in the Fed, fuck Israel. Jeffrey Epstein was Mossad. That's all I got. Y'all have a good one.